Hey everybody, it's Nix here from Key Features, and today I thought we'd take a rather cheeky look at this little number, the Renaissance Tarot by Brian Williams. Now, when I was doing a little bit of background research for this video, I did come across a review, and those of you who live in the UK may remember that programme. It was all about TV shows and people sending in their letters about what they thought of them, and it was called Points of View. And the letters usually fell into one of three camps. There was the glowing praise, there was the rather outraged, and there was the picky pedant who'd found something that they'd said that really wasn't quite right. And when they read out the letters, they used to pick a rather appropriate voice to do it in. So I'm going to put my glasses on because I have got rather old lady eyes, and I'll read this to you and see which camp you think it falls into. It's from the Eclectic Tarot website. Lots of muscles, lots of penises. Maybe the meanings are more accessible to men, but for me, they are chest-beating displays of male anatomy and little else. Well, if that's whetted your appetite, perhaps you'll join me and see how fruity this deck really is. Better empty my mouth before I start talking. So finished off the banana there, and let's get on to this deck. It was released in 1987 by US Games, and Brian Williams sadly passed away when he was only 44 years old. He had, however, created 4 decks by that time, this being one of them. He'd also created the Ship of Fools, which I also have, which is inspired by the art of Sebastian Brandt's Narrenschaft, which, being something of a completionist when it comes to books, I also have that. So this has rather beautiful art in it. This is the folio edition, which I managed to pick up at a reasonable price secondhand, and it's got all these beautiful fools here done from the original woodcuts, which Brian based his Ship of Fools deck on. And I'm not going to be looking at that one today. Might save that for another video. I haven't actually worked with it. I did manage to get a copy. This was sealed when I got it, even though it's out of print, so it is in excellent condition. But as well as those two, he also created a deck called Pomo, short for postmodernism, and a Minchiati, which I believe was slightly hurried up in production because of the unfortunate appearance of impending death. We lost him far too young, and by all accounts he was a wonderful person. I read some comments by Mary K. Greer online, who knew him, and she said how he was sort of known as the Renaissance man of tarot and had quite a sense of humour. He was a graduate of University of California, spoke 6 languages, and was a painter as well as leading art and architecture tours in Italy. And when he died, he was survived by his partner Jeff Gilman. So yes, Brian was a gay man, and I absolutely love this deck. I love the imagery of it. And it's all about the sort of classical background, the Greek and Roman, and then there's also some artistic references, a little bit of Christianity. And what's interesting to me is that this deck was released just a few months apart from another deck that was also based on classical mythology, the Mythic Tarot. I've got a copy here. This is also out of print. Unfortunately, my one didn't come in the greatest of boxes, but the cards are in really good condition. And I'm going to have a little comparison of the cup suit when we get to it, of the Mythic tarot, especially in the light of that review, rather scathing, about all the nudity and the musculature, which I hope you're not going to be disappointed, because this is his significator card, which I would say has got sort of modesty ribbons going on here. It's not particularly muscular, is it? He does have these tiny little people here, but let's get, there's a sort of dot going on there, but yeah, the promise of abundant penises you might be needing your magnifying glass is all I'm saying. And I do rather wonder what all that upset was about. I'm just going to start laying down some of the majors. Now, Brian does talk about the majors, which are all based on the Greco-Roman pantheon. And he says that they are done in a Renaissance style. They're very theatrical. I think this whole deck is theatrical. It's almost as if a costume designer, and he maybe had a sort of wish to do costume design, and he's done it for these rather beautiful cards. So if we just look at some of these ones. So we've got my favourite here, this Dionysian character, Dionysus, with his thyrsus there with a little memento mori, and he describes it as a panther. I do think, to be more accurate, it probably should have been a leopard, which is obviously a type of panther, but that one hasn't got its spots. The leopard has changed its spots in this case. And there is, oh shock horror, a man with no clothes on, who I do believe is a little depiction of Dionysus. Oh, is that my tea? Oh, lovely. Good. Other half has brought me a lovely cup of tea there, peppermint and licorice. Just have a... So you can see the cards have this really beautiful bronzish paint on them. It shimmers in the light and is lovely. I really like the colours as well on this deck. And then we move on to the Magician. So this is Hermes, and he's shown with his little creatures up there. As you can see, musculature and phalluses. I don't really understand what that fuss was all about. And then this one, La Papessa, she's got her Taurus scroll there, and this is Demeter. And then we move on to the beautiful peacock. It can only be Hera, can't it? Or Juno. Look at that skirt there. It is very Shakespearean, isn't it? It's almost as if you were staging a play of all these great figures, kind of crossed with a little of his historic archetype. I can only imagine he did amazing tours of Italy when he went on them. So that's just the first of the majors. But before I go on, I just wanted to talk about, it also comes with this really incredible book. Well, or rather, he also produced this really incredible book. The deck itself comes with a little white book, which is this. And I would say that if you get the deck, which is still readily available and very affordable, that you can just work with this little white book. I first read with it using just this, and I found there was actually a lot of information in it. And let's have a look at the Fool. The Fool is dressed in an elaborate slashed costume of a 16th century court jester. The plumes in his hair signify folly, and the staff he holds is surmounted with grapes and a tiny skull, symbols of Bacchic abandon and terror. The Fool's companion deity is in fact Dionysus Bacchus, and he is accompanied by the leopard Dionysus brought back from his wandering revels in India. A lily of the valley flowers at the Fool's feet, symbolising blithe innocence and simplicity. And he's got a little Bible quote there. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, they toil not, neither do they spin. The Fool signifies rebirth and new beginnings, as does the constellation Aries. The pagan god Dionysus, who is dismembered and made whole again, as his grapevine is pruned to be renewed in spring. And the Christian Saviour, whose resurrection symbolised the lily, and whose feast, like those of Dionysus and Demeter of Eleusis, is celebrated with the grape and grain. So you can see there's quite a lot there, and he also includes the Hebrew letters and the Italian, as well as the Fool. He's got Il Matto there. But if you want even more information, well, this is quite an amazing book. And I would say, even if you don't like the art of the deck, even if you don't want to get the deck, this book is a must, because he goes through so much history, he goes through so much background on the Renaissance, and when you get into the cards, he also does little pictures of all the different decks. Top, we've got the Visconti Sforza Tarot there, Rosenwald collection. He talks through all the different symbolisms that have been used over the time, the little quotes about it. I mean, honestly, there's just so much information. Other artworks that have influenced the Chariot. Mars there. He talks here about the astrology. Most of the cards of the major arcana will be associated with one of the 12 constellations of the zodiac, or with one of the 7 planets of traditional astrology. Unlike many tarot commentaries, the astrological aspect of the major arcana is not of primary importance in the trumps of the Renaissance tarot. The correspondences of planet and constellation to card are more important in the minor arcana, where the fourfold view of the universe expresses itself in an interlocking cosmic design. Even in the minor arcana, however, the intention is not to say that the zodiac sign A goes with card B, but rather to suggest a family of correspondences and parallels. No compelling, coherent astrological arrangement of the cards has ever been put forward, and I think that's still true today. A grain or more of salt should accompany any construct, or better, each reader might invent a personal, unique design. And I rather like that idea. And similarly, he says about the meanings that they can contain multiple meanings. Any particular object or set of elements within an image may have symbolic content. We will try to sort through these possible meanings with an eye especially toward the cultural context from which the strange figures emerged, that of early Renaissance Europe. We will often refer to the sort of manuals that would have been consulted by Renaissance artists and poets when interpreting or inventing a symbolic creation. Now, what do we mean by the Renaissance? So, well, I'm not a great Renaissance scholar, so I'll try to give a brief overview as best I can. It's the period that started in Italy around the 14th century, and it was characterised by a revival of classical learning. In other words, it's sort of Greco-Roman antiquity. And around that time, we have a greater influence of humanism, and also inventions of art and science. And it's often considered to have had a great impetus after the fall of Constantinople, which of course we had the Greek church in the east, and we had Rome, and then the Christian church was divided. Now, the Conference of Florence was all about trying to bring the church back together. And a rather interesting character crops up. And it is Gemistos Plethon. He's called Gemistos. And this is from the Solabusca. Now, he went along to advise about this division in the church. And he was raised in a Greek Orthodox family. But rather interestingly, he had been sent and tutored by a Jewish scholar who introduced him to Plato and all of the Greco-Roman type pantheon. And when he came to the Council of Florence, I'll show a little JPEG of the painting of him with all these great and good. What's interesting is you'd think, well, which side was he going to... He decided that the best thing to do was to do away with Christianity altogether and return to the worship of the Hellenic pantheon and the equivalent Roman gods. And he became a very big influence on the wealthy of Italy, particularly the Medicis. And what I've noticed in this Solabusca deck is that as well as him looking like Platon, which he took that name, his actual name was Gemistos, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but these correspond to the bulls on the Medici shield, which that would be suggestive of a female with the tide blue, and these would be the male offspring. And it's often thought that the bulls on the Medici shield are reminiscent of Etruscan votive womb offerings, where they put these little bulls in. And the Medici's family initially did come from Tuscany, which had before was obviously it was Etruscan. So I wonder if that's a little bit of the mystery of the Solabusca tarot going on there, and why it's not a Christian deck at all. It's very pagan, and it seems perhaps this Platon guy influenced them, and then of course they started paying for all this incredible art that was influenced by classical Greco-Roman antiquities and so forth. And from Italy, this influence and interest spread, and there was people translating, looking for old texts and trying to find out about what had gone on in terms of the worship of these gods, because of course there wasn't an oral tradition. It had all been lost after the fall of the Roman Empire, and so there was a big resurgence, especially among the upper classes. And later on, we even get, into the 18th century, we get things like the Hellfire Club in Britain, with people all associating it with kind of decadence and being not very Christian at all. I also wanted to show you this little guy. I do pottery, and this was made, so we're talking about Greco-Roman antiquities. This was made from clay in the woods in North London, where there was an old Roman kiln found. And so they dug out some of the clay, the same clay that was used. They built a reconstructed kiln the same way the Romans did. And then we all sat and made oil lamps based on a Roman design. They were very commonly made, because obviously they needed a lot of oil lamps, and they weren't a particularly refined thing to make. And then we had a bit of time to decorate it, and I did mine with this little guy on here, and well, there's a little bit of a wonky spout, but yeah, they did say, well, that's very in keeping with what the Romans actually did do. They had quite a bawdy sense of humour, and that's something that could well have featured on an actual Roman oil lamp. So I'm rather pleased with that. I haven't actually tried it yet. They did show us how we could put oil in and put a wick in it, but I don't know, I'm a bit scared about burning the house down, messing around with that sort of thing. But yeah, my little Roman oil lamp. But let's get back to these. Now, the moon card and the sun card, there was quite a funny extract from that rather interesting review I opened with, which also talked about these two cards. Now, it says, the review says, the homoerotic image for the sun card seemed to obscure the meaning. I find that a very strange concept, because it's usually a male on the sun card. It's associated with males. Here we've got the dolphin, because this is Apollo, and his creature is the dolphin who he was associated with. And yeah, I mean, it's homoerotic. Apollo did have male lover. But however, if we look at the Rider-Waite-Smith card, this young child on a horse, and this is Apollo, because Apollo is associated with the sunflower. It's also thought perhaps it's meant to be a child, because there's a quote in the Bible about needing to be childlike in order to enter the kingdom of heaven and become as a child. But does that have more meaning than that? I'm not sure that it does. I think that's perfectly fine. And the reviewer also wasn't very keen on the moon card, because they said that the women playing stringed instruments in a garden seemed too tame. I'm interested to see, what does he say about his moon card? Let's have a look at this while I'm reading this. The moon itself is a golden crescent with a human face in three-quarter profile. Artemis Diana stands in the right corner with her bow and hound. And in the other corner jumps a stag, an animal sacred to the goddess of the hunt. The card is numbered, and then it goes on about the Hebrew letter. The moon is variously portrayed in early cards. The moon of the Visconti Sforza deck is a crescent held high by a robed woman, undoubtedly Diana, because she holds an unstrung bow. And there's a lot of pictures here and explaining what each of these historic cards mean. So if you're interested in historic decks, I mean, I don't have that many, but this encourages me because it gives you access to them. Then this is a really good book to start with, and it explains a lot of the symbology, and it brings us all the way up to the RWS moon card here. And then another thing that he does differ in the majors, and he explains it, is instead of using the term judgment, he uses the term the angel, which I rather like. I mean, yeah, muscular, but I don't have a problem with that. I guess if you do, you do. And then the world, which is the traditional woman with the four evangelists or elements, or he goes into great detail in the book about what all of these correspondences can differently mean, which is really quite fascinating. And all of the information about the deities that he's chosen for the cards and explanations as to why. And it really is a great book. I recommend it highly. And I just wanted to read you a bit of more of his thoughts about the world of allegory. The world of the tarot is a mythological world, a world of metaphor, symbol and story. We may think of the ancient myths of religion and folklore as obsolete, but they are vitally important still. Carl Jung discovered the elements of ancient religions in the strange stories each of us enacts at night in sleep, our dreams. We can view the actors of our dreams as archetypes, aspects of the universal human personality dressed in magical robes. The dreamer embodies each role. We are brave Perseus, we are Hermes or Athena, who lends him magical tools. We are Andromeda, chained to the rock. We are the sea monster. The heroes and the trials of the subconscious are not pretty tricks we play on ourselves. They are the story of life. And he goes on even more about all of that. And I love it. Now, another card I want to take a closer look at is the Lover's card. Again, a rather disappointing lack of nudity, really, unless you count this really teeny, minuscule image up here. And, of course, this is supposed to be Venus and Mars, the classic lovers, who also appear, although many people don't recognise them, on the Rider-Waite-Smith. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot more nudity on the RWS than there is here. The rather fiery Mars, and then we have Venus here, also with hints of Eve with the temptation. And this is the jilted lover, Vulcan, who was the smith to the gods and initially married to Venus, but she took rather a fancy to Mars, and they had quite an interesting liaison. And you know, that's a liaison that continues with interesting planetary connections. And then, of course, we move to the Devil card, where Venus and Mars have been trapped caught in the act, so to speak. And yes, this probably does have a little bit of rather disappointing stuff going on, and more in here, I would say, facing us. So yeah, here we have Venus and Mars enchained by Vulcan, really, on some levels. It's not only that in that card, but that is definitely a metaphor there. Vulcan, having seen, well, Aphrodite and Ares, as they would be called by the Greeks, just decided to make some chains. He was very good at his welding or metal work, and caught them both and shamed them. It's interesting how these two cards feature very similar stories, I think, and rather beautiful. Rather beautiful, this one, I think. This devil, he is quite handsome, but you know, I don't mind a handsome devil, and I don't suppose Brian did either. And then when we get to the minors, as well as the elemental associations, which he puts air as the rods and fire for the swords, which I know is opposite to what a lot of us use these days, but I don't think these correspondences were as set in stone, so to speak, back in the 80s, and people did feel freer to play around with them, and they had been played around with in other decks. And he also corresponds different of cities of Italy. So for the swords, we have martial Milan and all the warriorness going on, and he has a myth that he tells within that of Achilles and the Trojan War. And yes, we do have a lot of male figures in that, but you know, it was fighting in the Trojan War, and it's swords. There's Chiron there, the tutor to Achilles. And we also have these little tiny keywords, which I find quite useful. So for the Ace of Swords, we've got power and triumph there, and you also have it in Italian translated over that side. And I think, to me, this is a little bit like the Jamie Sawyer RWS, where you've got those mandalas in the background with the planetary correspondences, but they're very subtle, so you don't have to look like you're really relying on them. And actually, if you're doing a reading, these little things could perhaps be helpful as extra prompts. So that's the swords. And then we have my favourite, of course, Dionysus represented on that rod, but the story for that is creative Florence and Hercules and the struggles of Hercules. We've got the Nemean lion there and so forth, and again there's a bit of wrestling going on, but you know, Hercules, and he's got the lion there. And this represents the part of the story where he had been tricked by his lover, who thought she'd been jilted. She'd given him this tunic to wear that had been imbued with some poison in it. He put it on and it started burning, and so he sort of built his own funeral pyre, thinking he's going to die in this horrible pain. He kind of embraced the struggle, embraced the awfulness of it all, but instead of dying, he became an immortal and was admitted as an Olympian up on Olympus. So there's lots of little stories, that's all in the guidebook, about how these cards fit with that. But the suit I really wanted to take a closer look at is the cups. Now, cups are my suit. I am a Scorpio. They always seem to me to be so beautiful. And he has chosen for that story Aqueous Venice as the corresponding city, and then the story of Psyche and Cupid, or Eros as he's also known. And the reason I want to go through that, I'm going to go through it in parallel with the Mythic Tarot, because they were released months apart, so that I don't think they could have known what the other was doing. So yes, this is the Mythic Tarot, which also uses Greek myths to tell stories. And if we go to the cups, And this deck has become very much of a classic, and I don't think there's been too much complaints about the nudity in it. Can't be accounting for whether it's any more or less muscular, but I do find it interesting that Brian's deck has not become quite such a classic, whereas this one has. So we have Psyche, and of course the story of Psyche and Eros. Psyche is the soul and Eros is love, and it's all a metaphor for the initial excitement of love, but how we really need to wrestle to fully unite the soul with love. It's a spiritual journey, and you know, it may start with erotic love, but it becomes this more profound love, this deeper love. Can be for the divine, it can be for just the whole universe, it can be for ourselves. Let's have a little sip of tea. But it's a very appropriate story for the cups. So basically the story of Psyche, she was a beautiful mortal, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, it's a bit like the wicked queen in Snow White at this point. We don't usually think of Aphrodite being wicked, but she is a bit wicked in this story. And she hears that people are worshipping this beautiful mortal woman, Psyche, because she is so beautiful. And Aphrodite gets rather jealous, and so she decides that she's going to effectively get rid of Psyche from being competitive and make her marry this awful, ugly monster. And she sends Eros, her son, off with his bows and arrows to go and spear Psyche, who's been chained to a rock, and to make her fall in love with this sort of monster thing. But, and here we have very obviously painted, but we have on this deck, instead of just the pictures, we have rather beautiful pips, and you can read these just as pips, but you can also see in these little tiny vignettes here, Psyche and Eros being sent off with his bows and arrows. And then we also get some little keywords here, love, passion, which, you know, that is the Two of Cups. And although I very, very much do love the Mythic Tarot, I think on this image wins for me in a reading. That's, you know, these cards also look very beautiful laid out in a spread. There's different colour backgrounds for the different suits. This lovely pastels and line drawings. So, and the cardstock is very nicely Gaines, whereas this is unfortunately a little bit Llewellyn-y. But no, I do love you, Mythic Tarot. No, don't listen. But yes, this is so beautiful and has this same story here. And then we get onto the Three of Cups, where Eros has sort of accidentally impaled himself on the arrow, and he ends up falling in love with Psyche. So that sort of backfires on old Aphrodite. And Psyche follows him off to his palace to, you know, live like a queen with him. Solace and rescue, and she's rescued from being chained to the rock and having to go and be sent off with an ugly monster. But she asks Eros if he can send her sisters, who are not as attractive as she is. It's, again, we've got very fairy tale like the ugly sisters coming up, and he does warn her that perhaps that's not a good idea, but he agrees to let them come to the palace. And they start nattering, all because Psyche also has not been allowed to see Eros, because mortals can't see gods, you know, as they are. So they start saying, oh, maybe he's not all he's cracked up to be. He's probably horrible and probably this awful, ugly thing. And, you know, you better go and have a look at him, even though you've promised that you never will. So they start stirring the pot. And here we have bitterness as the little keyword, and some sisters there. And Psyche trying to say, no, you know, I love him. And they're like, no, well, do you really love him? You don't know who he is. You don't know what he's like. So we get that. And then on the Five of Cups, she's so tempted to look at him. She takes an oil lamp and she looks at his face, and then he wakes up, some of the oil drops on him. He wakes up, he sees that she's sort of betrayed him, and she runs off and the palace disappears, and, you know, all is lost basically for poor Psyche with her love. What do we have there? The only thing with this deck is error. It is a bit small and not just on the naughty bits. Some of the words can be quite hard to see. If you might need to sort of get a magnifying glass out if you're a bit like me with your eyes. So then she's all nostalgic for what had been, and she's remembering, and there's remorse there as well, nostalgia. So these beautiful pips, and the Mythic Tarot has this artwork here. And then the Seven of Cups, Aphrodite sets her decides, well, she's begging, I really want Eros back. And Aphrodite sets her these utterly ridiculous, mean tasks of like, well, you can get him if you can just do this, you know. So this is the Seven of Cups, where it's both delusion and it's also dreams. Seven of Cups is my card, my Deccan card, and I would say that's quite appropriate, you know. Sometimes you're very creative, other times it borders into perhaps delusional, but I do love the Seven of Cups, and it can be distractions as well, which, yeah, keeping my mind on a task can be a struggle sometimes, because I'm always making so many associations that keeping my mind on one of them is difficult. And so there we have the Seven of Cups. What does it say in the corner there? Fantasy illusions. And these beautiful shapes, which you can read as pips. And then on to the Eight of Cups. So this is the task where Psyche is basically Aphrodite. She's done all her tasks. She kind of meets them unbelievably. But then she's given this one of going into the underworld, which of course no mortal can go into and come back out again. But Aphrodite says you must go into the underworld and find this beauty potion secret of Persephone. I want it, you know, I want that special cream. Get that for me, and, you know, you can have Eros. I'll let you off. So this is the walking away in a way, but she kind of knows that going into the underworld, it's sort of her last chance, but it's not really a chance. It's actually kind of effectively a suicide mission in a way. And then she gets the potion, though, miraculously, and comes out, but she can't help but look in the trunk, and when she opens it, it's this sleeping pod thing that sends her into a deep sleep. So we get the fairy tale of Sleeping Beauty here as well. And then the names there are Surrender and Oblivion. Isn't that a beautiful pattern there? You have that central pillar, the divine pillar, the Shiva pillar, and then these extra cups there. Surrender, yeah. And then Eros, seeing his love, who he still is, you know, he still loves her, goes and petitions Zeus and says, look, Aphrodite is being a right woman of jealousy, and you need to put her in check, because poor Psyche, I love her, she's done all these things, and she needs to basically, we need to be allowed to get back together, she needs to come back awake. And Zeus listens. Zeus comes up with tells Aphrodite to back off. Basically, Eros and Psyche are united, she's fulfilled all her tasks. And we get the Nine of Cups, success. And there's Aphrodite's even toasting them at this point. And she gets given immortality. The Ten of Cups. And that is your happily ever after. Pleasure and contentment. and she's got her wings, her immortality. She can go and live with her love, Eros. The soul and love are united. And I just think they're very beautiful. I love the Mythic Tarot. I love the storytelling in that, but I also love the fact that this is an extraordinarily beautiful pip deck with these illustrations and words up here in Italian and translated into English, and these beautiful backgrounds. And also when it comes to the minor arcana and reading pips, he has some useful information in the bigger book. I'll just get to the section on the minors, in which he talks about the 4-part system of the 4 suits, and he then ties that in with the corresponding symbols which are used on the card backs. And he says the medieval symbols for the elements lie in each corner. 4 corresponding animals float within. The fire-loving salamander, he puts for the swords. I know I would put that for the rods, but I think, you know, you can switch that around in your mind. It doesn't really matter. A bird for the airy staves. You can easily say that's the swords. A fish for the watery cups, and a tortoise for the earthy coins. And then he says, a woman and man recline at the centre. Their hands join at the centre, both of the circle and of their bodies and of the rectangle of the card. The central point of the design, where the fingers interlace, represents the eternal centre, the universal unity. I think that's beautiful, isn't it? The duality of female and male divides and balances existence after the unity of one. So I don't think this is just a male deck. I think it's a very balanced deck. And he also talks about the Pythagorean tetrad, the monad of unity, then the 2 forms of, he's got yin and yang there, then the triad, and then the base, the tetrad. And these all, Pythagorean number theory is something that we use a lot for reading pip decks. And he also talks about how the idea of the universe, the macrocosm, is meant to parallel the human mind and the body. And of course, that's an idea that carries on in the great chain of being, to which you can see in literature such as Shakespeare, where the head, the king, if that's disrupted, there's chaos, there's storms. This idea that the body represented society, represented in a greater scheme the hierarchy of the universe and all that sort of thing. I'll just take you through some of the other minors. So this is the coin suit, which the coins correspond to Rome, of course, and it's the beautiful story of Persephone, which a lot of people will be familiar with. You know, Persephone being kidnapped into the underworld, her mother Demeter being in such grief that the world becomes sterile, and then Persephone having to be rescued, but she can't because she's eaten the pomegranates. So they have to come to this sort of divine compromise in which Persephone will spend a third of the year with her husband. People say half, but it's not half the year. We'd be living miserably if it was half the year. A third of the year with her husband, and the rest of the time the earth will be fertile and springing life forth. The other 2/3. Persephone and Hades, and there's her eating the pomegranate. I mean, look at these beautiful pips. 8, the 8 of coins, modesty and candor. And you have some reverse meanings there. Safety and compromise, which is obviously what they have to reach. And then family and riches, when they reach that, Demeter's corns and the grapes, everything returning to the earth. And then the fiery staves, which are Hercules, which just take you through those quickly. That's when he has to wrestle the three-headed dog at the mouth of Hades, of mouth of the underworld rather. Sudden activity. Well, that would definitely be sudden activity, wouldn't it? And then the swords, which is the military or martial Milan, which has the yellow behind it. And where's the bit with Achilles' heel? And that's where Achilles drags Hector around the walls of the city in revenge. Misery, revenge. Oh yes, there's the Achilles' heel. And that one is called Ruin and Pain, the 10 of Swords. The idea of the weak spot that sort of ends up defeating Achilles. Even a great hero has. And I rather like that compared to the person impaled by the swords. It's a different take on it. And I just put out some of these, a couple of different cards from how these lay out together. The colours. Look at those colours on a spread. And I'm doing a fairly small spread here because I want you to be able to see the details of the cards. But on a nice tableau, that they just look really beautiful. And it makes it quite easy to see how many you've got of each suit. I like the simplicity of the pips, but also with a little bit of detail of the story. If you want to tell more of a story, you can. If you want to be less character-based, you can be. I just think it's a really versatile deck. And I'm just going to take another walk through. I think it's a deck left to us by someone who was taken too soon and who I think would be one of the greats of the tarot world, would have made more decks, would have had more discoveries, would have absolutely enjoyed and relished all the things that we now know about the tarot that have been discovered, and he would have been part of tarot history. And I just think this deck deserves a lot more attention than it gets, and a lot more use and credit, and because it's just absolutely beautiful. And I do love a tower card where somebody loses their head. I love that metaphor there. And that's very macrocosmic and microcosmic, isn't it? The society falls as the head falls. And I don't know whether you think the moon is not wild enough, but, you know, we have got Diana up there. And the angel. Oh, the sun, naughty sun. I rather like Apollo there with his lover. And the angel instead of judgment, because of course I do think that judgment, maybe even homophobia, because of course Brian lived in a different era when we didn't have gay marriage and all sorts of things like that. And even in where I live in the UK in the 80s, we had Section 28, which banned people from being taught about being gay. And I think perhaps that did play a role in the timing of this deck being rather sort of maybe not doing so well as the Mythic tarot did, because perhaps it was associated with gay man. I don't know. I'd like to know what your thoughts are in the comments. I don't want to get too controversial, but I just think this is an extraordinary deck, really. And the book is worth it on its own. And he's apparently done one for the Minchiati deck that he did. I haven't got the Minchiati deck, but he did a book for the Minchiati deck, which is also meant to be exceptionally good and full of history and illustrations and comparisons of different decks. And I hope you've enjoyed having a look through it with me. And maybe you'll be tempted to go and purchase a copy if you haven't already got it in your collection, or get it off the shelf and have a bit of a closer look. And it is a deck that respects all aspects of culture. You know, there's the pagan, there's Jewish references, there's Christian references, and I think, you know, even from a non-religious point of view, all the history that he's put into the book about tarot, it's got something for everybody, this deck. And I think we talk about diversity now. Well, he was doing diversity, wasn't he? But I personally do not think there's too much male nudity. I think, in fact, I can hardly see it. Given the amount of nudity we have on some things today, and including the Mythic tarot, which no one complained about, even though that's got quite a lot of nudity. So a very beautiful deck, and I've really enjoyed having another look at it. It reads really well. I've read with it. It's particularly good on sort of, surprisingly, kind of more everyday type readings. Because of the pips, I think you get a lot of clarity, and you can throw down a lot of cards without becoming overly cluttered. Although it's got the symbolism of things in the corners, it doesn't really overtake things. So yeah, have another look. I tried not to slip over too many banana skins verbally there, but I did have to stop and start a bit. But hopefully I'll manage to cobble together something vaguely coherent. And thank you for watching, and hope to see you on another video very soon. Bye for now.